Okay, so we're diving deep into this G20 summit in Rio, and you handed me this stack of articles, and it looks like Brazil. They've been busy.
Yeah, they really have. It's pretty amazing to see them leading this group, this group of heavy hitters with this focus on hunger, poverty, and climate action.
Yeah, a new global alliance against hunger, pushing for economic fairness and climate action. I mean, it's a lot to unpack. So let's get right into it and give everyone the rundown of, what happened in Rio.
The summit just wrapped up on the 19th. And, the G20 isn't just some casual get-together. It's 19 of the world's biggest economies, plus the EU. So their decisions really do have, global impact.
Absolutely. So with Brazil leading the charge this year, they launched this global alliance against hunger and poverty. And get this, 148 founding members have already signed on. We're talking countries, organizations, even big financial institutions.
Yeah, that's significant. It shows a real commitment to tackling these issues. And the goal is ambitious zero hunger by 2030. I mean, that might seem like a pipe dream when you consider that the FAO reports over 733 million people are undernourished right now, and that number's been climbing.
It's a massive undertaking for sure. But you know what really caught my eye wasn't just the sheer number of members, in this alliance. It was how they're structuring it. They're setting up a council of champions.
Oh, no, that's interesting. These aren't just figureheads. We're talking about people with the power to actually make things happen in, their respective spheres. Think of it as a network of catalysts for change.
So it's not just, a feel-good agreement that everybody signs and then forgets about.
Exactly. They're building an accountability and creating a framework for action.
Hmm.
And even beyond just this alliance, the G20 as a whole made some pretty unprecedented commitments this year. For instance, tackling the issue of taxing billionaires, something that's never been done at this level before, and ensuring access to clean water, which is a fundamental human right that's often overlooked.
Yeah, speaking of unprecedented, President Lula didn't hold back. He really challenged wealthy nations to step up their climate game and acknowledge the role that indigenous communities play in protecting the planet.
Yeah, his proposal for a dedicated UN Council on Climate Change is particularly noteworthy. I
Hmm.
mean, imagine if that actually happens. It could completely reshape the global approach to climate action.
Yeah, that's bold. And it ties into another point that resonated with me. The G20 seems to be moving away from this idea that there's, a one-size-fits-all solution to climate action.
Right. They're recognizing that developing countries face different challenges and need more support to, transition to cleaner energy.
Yeah.
And this connects directly to the fight against poverty. Without sustainable development, lifting people out of poverty becomes a much steeper uphill battle.
So we're seeing this recognition that it's all interconnected, but beyond acknowledging the problem, did they actually, put any meat on the bones, so to speak? What concrete steps are being taken to bring these ambitious plans to life?
Well, one of the most encouraging signs is the creation of a dedicated task force for the Global Alliance against hunger and poverty. This isn't just a symbolic gesture. They're actively working to establish a solid framework for, gathering resources and implementing effective policies and technologies.
Okay, so there's actual movement beyond the declarations and promises. That's encouraging. And we're not just talking about G20 members, right? This alliance is open to any country that wants to join.
Exactly. It's a truly global effort, which I think speaks to the scale and the urgency of these challenges that we're facing.
It seems like President Lula in Brazil really wanted to make a statement with this summit, pushing for a more just and equitable world. But did this create any tension with other G20 members? Were there any disagreements or pushback on this progressive agenda?
There was broad support for the alliance and
Mm.
many of the sustainability goals. However, the idea of taxing billionaires did spark some debate. This is uncharted territory for the G20, so it's understandable that some members would hesitate before, committing to such a bold policy.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a tough pill to swallow for some of the more economically conservative members. It challenges a lot of long-held beliefs about how wealth is, you know, generated and distributed.
Exactly. But the fact that it was even included in the final declaration is significant. It signals a growing recognition within the G20 that extreme wealth inequality is a problem that demands attention.
So it's a departure from the trickle-down economics that we've seen dominate global policy for decades. For those unfamiliar, that's the idea that tax cuts and benefits for the wealthy will eventually benefit everyone as wealth trickles down through the economy.
Precisely. And this shift away from trickle-down thinking reflects a changing global landscape where social justice and climate change are taking center stage. Even if they don't always agree on the solutions, the G20's willingness to even engage in these discussions is a positive sign.
We've spent a lot of time on the Hunger Alliance and climate action, but the summit covered a lot more ground, right? What were some of the other big themes that emerged?
Well, one key area was the need for a more robust and equitable global financial system. President Lula was quite vocal about reforming institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, arguing that they need to be more responsive to the needs of developing countries.
That's a criticism that's been around for a while, right? The idea that these institutions often favor the interests of wealthy nations, sometimes at the expense of developing ones.
Yes, and the G20 Rio Summit saw a renewed push to address these concerns and create a more level playing field. There was also a lot of discussion around promoting sustainable development, particularly in Africa, and tackling the growing issue of global debt, which is holding back many developing economies.
Wow, they really covered a lot of ground in just 2 days. But how much of this talk will actually translate into tangible change? It's easy to make promises at a summit, but what about the follow through?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Summits are great for setting goals and raising awareness, but the real work happens afterwards. It's too early to say what the lasting impact of the Rio Summit will be. But the fact that so many countries came together to grapple with these global challenges is a step in the right direction.
Let's talk more about the concept of sustainable development. It seems to be a recurring theme throughout these discussions. But for those of us who aren't policy wonks, what does it actually mean in practice?
Sustainable development is about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It's about finding a balance between economic growth, social equity, and environmental protection. It's not just about reducing poverty, it's about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive now and in the future.
So it's a holistic approach, recognizing that these issues are all interconnected.
Precisely. And it requires a shift in mindset away from short-term thinking and towards a long-term perspective. For example, investing in renewable energy might seem expensive in the short term, but it pays off in the long run by reducing pollution, creating jobs, and ensuring energy security.
It sounds like the G20 is starting to embrace this more holistic view, connecting the dots between issues like climate action, poverty reduction, and economic development.
Yes, and that's encouraging. It's a recognition that we can't solve one global crisis in isolation. We need to address them together. For instance, addressing climate change can help reduce poverty by protecting vulnerable communities from the impacts of extreme weather events and by creating new opportunities in the green economy.
So it's not just about aid or charity, it's about creating systems and policies that promote sustainable development and benefit everyone.
Exactly. And that's where initiatives like the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty come in. By tackling hunger, we're not just addressing a symptom, we're tackling a root cause of poverty and instability.
It's like a ripple effect. Addressing hunger can lead to improved health education and economic opportunities, ultimately contributing to a more stable and prosperous world.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And it's not just about G20 countries taking action. It's about empowering communities to take ownership of their own development.
The G20 summit also highlighted the importance of empowering women and girls, recognizing their crucial role in sustainable development.
Absolutely. When women have equal opportunities, entire societies benefit. It's about investing in education, healthcare, and economic empowerment for women.
This summit seems to have really pushed the envelope in terms of the breadth and depth of the issues discussed.
It's certainly a sign of the times. The world is facing complex challenges, and it's becoming increasingly clear that we need to work together to find solutions.
So beyond the lofty goals and declarations, what are some concrete examples of actions the G20 is taking to turn these words into reality?
Well, one specific commitment that caught my attention was the pledge to triple renewable energy capacity by 2030. This sends a powerful signal to the global energy market and indicates a serious commitment to transitioning away from fossil fuels.
That's a bold move. And I remember President Lula emphasizing the role of indigenous communities in climate action. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, indigenous peoples have been stewards of the environment for centuries, and their knowledge and practices are invaluable in the fight against climate change. President Lula's call to recognize and support their efforts was a welcome addition to the G20 agenda.
It's about respecting traditional knowledge and incorporating it into modern solutions.
Precisely. And it's also about ensuring that indigenous communities benefit from the transition to a green economy.
It sounds like there's a growing recognition that we need to move beyond a top-down approach to development and embrace a more inclusive and participatory model.
Absolutely. Sustainable development can't be imposed. It has to be built from the ground up, with the active participation of all stakeholders.
Speaking of inclusion, for the first time in G20 history, the group committed to addressing racism and promoting racial equality as part of the fight against inequality.
That's a significant development, signifying a shift toward a more holistic and inclusive approach to global problem solving.
The G20 Rio Summit really seems to have broken new ground in terms of the topics discussed and the commitments made.
And the world will be watching closely to see if these words translate into concrete action.
The stakes are high, but the potential for positive change is enormous. It feels like we're at a critical juncture, and the decisions made in the coming years will have a profound impact on the future of our planet.
Yeah, it really does feel like something big is happening. And, Brazil's leadership on all of this is remarkable.
Well, they certainly didn't shy away from those, tough conversations. Like when they called on wealthy nations to actually, pony up and provide the resources needed to support developing countries, as they transition to cleaner energy. That's a key point, right?
Mm.
Without that funding and, technology transfer, those transitions are just not going to happen. And what about that commitment to triple renewable energy capacity by 2030? That's a big deal, right?
It is. It really sends a message to the global energy markets that this is serious. The summit also highlighted the importance of protecting biodiversity and our oceans.
Right, because they play such a critical role in regulating the climate
Exactly.
and just sustaining life as we know it. It's like they're finally connecting all the dots, recognizing that we can't just address one global crisis without looking at all the others.
Exactly. That interconnectedness is really at the heart of the idea of sustainable development.
So what does this all mean? We've covered so much, a new global alliance, these ambitious goals for climate action, the push for economic fairness. It's a lot.
It is. The G20 Rio Summit has given us a lot to think about. This global alliance against hunger and poverty is a huge step forward, but the real test will be in the implementation.
Right. Actions speak louder than words. It's going to take a commitment from everybody involved, not just the G20 members, but the entire international community to make this happen.
Absolutely. It's going to take all of us.
So here's something to think about. What if even just one of these initiatives actually works? What kind of world would we be living in just a few years from now? It's exciting and kind of scary to think about.
It is. That's
Yeah.
what makes these deep dives so interesting. Trying to understand these issues and then figuring out what could actually change.
Yeah.
The G20 Rio Summit definitely gave us a lot to chew on, and hopefully it's a sign of, a more just and sustainable future.
Yeah, that's what we're all hoping for, right? Better future for everybody.